couple of people who are instrumental in making the movie who are here tonight. First off, Matt Hamachek, the editor and co-producer, is going to join us on stage. Somber jury is one half of the amazing composing team, along with Danny Bensi. And Dan Kohler, part of our amazing editorial team. And ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage tonight's moderator, and we're very honored to have with us Matt Heineman, director of Cartel Land from
Mr. Matt Hamachek, there's a mic.
Let's see, who am I forgetting? And a lot of the rest of our team are at the premiere of 13th right now, because we have the same graphics team. But anyway, Matt.
I mean, first, I just want everyone to give a huge round of applause again. This is an absolutely brilliant film, so please. I wrote down a few questions. I think there's a long history of amazing crime documentaries, and this deserves to be at the top of the pantheon of crime films. But I think what makes it so amazing is that it's about so much more than just the crime, the trial. I have 1,000 questions, but let me just start by asking, how did you guys get access to the story initially?
Donald Trump. Brian and I, no, he has nothing to do with it. Brian and I flew to Seattle in the summer of 2011, actually the fall of 2011, and we had met Amanda Knox at that point through her girlfriend, a girlfriend of hers who was living in Seattle, who had moved to Perugia from Seattle to be close to Amanda. And we flew to Italy not knowing what we were going to do, really. We had many ideas. We wanted to just start meeting people and doing research and trying to unpack all of the the headlines that had been loaded up for us for so many years, and we wanted to contextualize things, I think, for the most part.
And Amanda didn't want to do a documentary originally, and we kind of gave up on the project. And then in end of 2013, she was facing the second kind of appellate level decision, and eventually was a guilty verdict. And she reapproached us and said, "I've changed my mind." And from there, we still didn't know we had a movie because we only had one side, and so it then took us another year and a half to convince Julianne that we needed to do the film. So. You know this more than anyone, but a lot of waiting, and then also to get access to the Supreme Court files, it took quite a lot of cajoling and calling. We ended up, our Italian fixer ended up having to get the head of the Italian Supreme Court on the telephone with the head of the Florence court
on the other phone, two phones.
On the other phone, and kind of put them together to agree that we could get access to the files. So it was a lot of that. As well.
I feel like when you're making docs, especially, there's a lot of searching and questioning, and was there a moment either in the making of the movie or the editing of the film where you said, we have a movie?
Yeah, it was when we had the archive, because we had all of these kind of recountings of these stories, but it was all 5, 6 years, 7 years after the events, and so people's perspectives change so much. They remember things differently after 7 years. And so when we had all of those recordings all of a sudden, and you could actually hear Amanda speaking as a 20-year-old, that was a big breakthrough. Matt, is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I'd say also, for a very long time, all we were working with in the edit was Amanda and Raffaele's interviews. Mm-hmm. And then I really think that the movie started to come together, obviously, when we finally got McGinn and Pisa to talk as well. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
I mean, did you guys know what those audio recordings were when they first came back, or was it you and Nick that sort of unzipped them, right?
Nick, who's here tonight, I believe he had to figure out what program the Italian police were using.
It's a PC application, right?
Windows XP.
Windows XP.
What is that?
What?
I love that.
But I remember when Matt sent us the audio recording of the phone call with Brett, where she said that it was going to be the best year of her life, and all of us kind of went, "Oh my God."
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably the most difficult edit that I've ever been a part of for a doc, and a lot of it is because most of the time when you're working on documentaries, you're taking a very small story that nobody knows anything about, and bringing it to light. And this was the exact opposite. It had been told so many different ways, so incorrectly over so many years, and it took us so long for me, because you guys knew the story, and just to figure out what actually took place. And then I think what every other doc and what so many people had done was just report what had happened that day over and over and over again. And the opportunity that we had, which I think both of these guys captured so well, was to be with the 4 or 5 main players in the story. And I think the thing that really helped us focus the edit was looking at the story from sort of what was at stake for them personally as they went through this journey, and really emphasizing that. And what Brian, I think, means about especially the archival helping us out so much is that it took the burden off of them telling the story and the twists and the turns, and it allowed that part of their interviews to really come through.
I think there's so many brilliant aspects of the film. I think one thing when people look at an interview subject, they say, "Oh wow, it's amazing that she said that," but you never really think about the person who's asking the question. And I think one of the most amazing things about the film is the sort of performance, quote unquote, of Amanda, the range that you got out of her. Can you talk about sort of how many days it took to interview, the process of interview, or how she opened up, how you got her to open up, the trust you built with her?
I think it was with everyone as well. I mean, we did quite lengthy interviews, and I think the entry point for everything was a conversation instead of, you see at the beginning of the film the kind of Diane Sawyer and Chris Cuomo interviews, which were much more confrontational. And, we weren't really aiming for any of that. And then I think that, the interesting thing is all these people have tons of perspective now because they've thought about everything for so long. And I think one of the things that time does is A, it removes the emotion from the memory because you intellectualize it so much, and B, it gives you a bird's eye perspective. And what we found is just by asking questions that I don't think people were necessarily asking in those Diane Sawyer interviews, like, why do people care so much about this? It turns out that she and everyone else had actually spent a ton of time thinking about that naturally, and so it honestly was more of a, these people wanted to talk, and it was kind of, once they started, the floodgates kind of came open.
It also seems like, I think there's an incredible sort of combination of both the footage that you shot and obviously the archival and the brilliant job that Matt did editing. Can you talk about maybe it was a goal or not a goal, but it felt like it was a goal to sort of make you feel like you were there with them along this journey. It didn't feel like a traditional archival film that was like, oh, this happened 10 years ago and let's just roll the tapes. You really felt viscerally and emotionally like you were there.
Well, a lot of that too is sound design and score and all those other elements that are, like making this feel like a movie to you. I think when Brian and I first started working on this, we wanted to make a film, not a series or, not even a long film. We wanted it to be something that was digestible and understandable, and that's hard in 90 minutes. And then the way to really, like make sure that people understand that is to make it feel like an experience that takes them somewhere, right? You have to go to Italy in this movie. And so there's a lot it's a combination kind of all of those things that I appreciate the kind of words that we did well, the team effort we did.
I think the other element of it is it's so much about your kind of cultural biases and the cultural biases of the people in the film as well. Amanda looks at Italy and sees wine, food, and beautiful men, right? And Julian Benini looks at Seattle and sees anarchists. And so that actual butting of heads, like, that's such a, it's such a kind of a classical dramatic structure, even just in those two worldviews. And I think that the only way to make that work was to actually create the feeling of those places as well.
One last question, then I'll open. How much time do you have anyone here who's going to keep talking?
We've been left for our devices.
You guys are not allowed to leave. One last question, we'll open up to audiences. Who's guilty?
Oh, thank you, Matt. I think
We are. We all are.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Well, I was gonna, like, you know, we all consume these types of stories, right? And we kind of turn these into the things that they are, you know, just as much as anybody else. I think that, like, that's something that we found throughout the making of this, is that, you know, not only were we trying to make a meta commentary on how these things happen and how these things unfold, but, you know, we're also complicit in our own way, in that we've made a film about Amanda Knox. But what we've all hoped, I think, is that in doing that, we did so because we had something to say. We had a different, like, point of view to access the conversation and to access the, you know, these stronger or these larger themes about narrative, and, you know, how narrative influences people, or, you know, how you know, certain points of view and emotions affect the way you understand stories and information.
I think the other thing that is just worth saying in seeing the movie come out today, and, you know, following the reaction to it a little bit, is that people are so quick to look for a villain, and that was never the intention of the movie. And I think that, you know, it's just kind of stood out to us right away with that reaction. A lot of people jumped to conclusions about a few of the men in the film, and, you know, that I think what we really wanted to do was to show, you know, how many different components kind of came together to create this story, and it's not just about one person. And I think that, you know, if anything, the movie is arguing for complexity, and not for reduction to villainhood. And I think that, you know, we're hoping that doesn't really continue, but we're slightly nervous that it's going to.
And sorry, one last show before I don't want to forget this. How do people see, if people want to tell their friends, how do they see the film if
Yeah.
they can't come to the theater?
They can go to Netflix.
Okay.
Have you heard of it, Matt?
I just heard about it.
It's in 190 countries. It's also playing in LA if people are in LA for the next week, or here.
Netflix sound. Yes, you.
First of all, I have to say that people are losing their shit out here since you mentioned Chef's Table.
We have one of the editors of Chef's Table who's done a bunch of the best episodes in House Brad Roseman. If you want to storm it afterwards.
My question didn't really hit me until the very end, but it kind of bubbled up. There was a lot of anger bubbling up in me, kind of in the same way as when I watched the Duke lacrosse documentaries. I forget what it's called, Fantastic Lives.
Yeah.
And Brian, I know you went to Duke, and was wondering if that, kind of living through that, had any bearing on your interest in this story, and if not, why were you guys interested in this story?
It did not, but that story is also wild and crazy, and certainly do remember living through that. I think that what interested us was actually the fact that this story had remained in the headlines for 4 years by the time we started, and for us, something that started as a tragedy, it seemed very strange for the news cycle to not have devoured it and moved on by that time period. And also the way it had become so much about the personalities of these people. It had almost become a kind of celebrity magazine almost every week, investigating the twists and turns of the case through the prism of how people were behaving, or what people were being told about how they were behaving in prison or in court. I remember one headline that really stuck out at the beginning. Is at the beginning of the trial, the first trial, and it read, "Smiling, laughing, on trial for murder." And I think that just right from the start, it was fascinating to see the way that the story had been framed, and we were trying to figure out, you know, how does that happen, and, you know, what does it kind of say about all of us that we're so fascinated, including ourselves, with that kind of you know, reporting presentation.
Oh, wow, this section is really fun. First here, in the glasses? Yeah. Oh, we both have glasses. Right here.
You talked about villains. Did you try to interview Rudy? Question number one. Question number two, since you were working with Amanda by 2015 when the Supreme Court of Italy's decision came down and your cameras were there, do you know what her plans were to do had they sustained a guilty verdict?
Oh, wow. We do not know what the plans would have been, because there would have been another process then if Italy would have had to choose whether or not to pursue extradition at that point, and so there would have been another long legal battle. And the way extradition works is this request gets sent to the State Department, and the State Department can then either pass it on to the U.S. courts to honor or kind of deny it and stop it in its tracks. And so no one really knows what would have happened at that juncture. And yes, we did reach out to Rudy Gaudet. His attorney speaks for him in the film. Now his ex-attorney, after we interviewed him. No connection, sorry. Sorry, that was misleading. And we would certainly continue to love to speak to him, and I would note as well that we really wanted to speak to the Kercher family as well and hear their side of this terrible story. But when we reached out to them a number of times, they didn't get back to us, and so obviously if they change their minds, we'd love to talk to them as well.
Right behind. Yep.
My question has to do with the police questioning, because it seemed as though it was so brutal and so incessant that it influenced both Amanda and the boyfriend. And I didn't notice that there was much mention of that in the film, and perhaps I just misunderstood. But related to that, at the very end, it sounded like Amanda talked to the boyfriend, and there was some reconciliation. And I just wonder if some of it was that each of them realized that they made statements under pressure that were not necessarily true.
I would first of all note that is very much under contention. Both sides disagree, and in fact, in the final Supreme Court verdict, the one thing that was upheld against Amanda was her her calumnia, which is a false accusation essentially against Patrick Lumumba. In the film, both of them kind of talk about wondering whether the other person had turned on them, and I think that what became clear to them through the course of the experience was that had they believed that had happened, and of course the police very much disagrees with that version of events.
I think what we saw too is that over the course of the years, they publicly you could see that after they were acquitted in 2011, maybe Raffaele came to the United States at one point. Maybe they met. There was photos on the internet. But yeah, they are inexorably bound together, right, forever and ever. So it's like going through any experience that's defining or traumatizing. Who do you call except for the one person who could probably possibly empathize with you in that moment? So,
and of course, they are not together anymore. There are very few one-week romances that survive an 8-year trial. Yeah.
Sorry, we just have time for one more quick question.
One more really good question.
Who has the best question?
Bradley, better give us a good question.
What I love about the movie is it's almost like a period piece, because like the status of the media and like how information was communicated is almost like once in a lifetime. Do you guys think, like one of my favorite lines is like, I logged onto the internet, like no one logged on. So I was like, do you think any case could ever have this kind of attention ever again, given the status of the information era? Like,
Yes.
our presidential election.
I mean, look at how much this case is still discussed today, and it's been years now since it's happened. I think that if anything, it would be, you could see something like this becoming even more discussed. I think that what we found over the course of making the film, and I think this was a surprise, was that it also, this story happened during the rise of social media, and so it became one of the first stories where a lot of the coverage was driven by, what can we fit in a tweet? What can we get people to click through by making a headline? And so it's actually, I think hopefully in that regard, it is a little bit of a kind of, kind of a remembrance of times past. And certainly I think that we're seeing a lot of that kind of similar, short attention span journalism that is happening now.
Last thing I want to say is, please, huge round of applause for the film.